Put that damn log down, Denise. Seriously, I'm not asking twice. I said it loud enough for her to hear through the trees, and for a second everything just froze. The cold morning air, the squeaking wheelbarrow, even the crows up on the fence line. She turned slowly like I was the one interrupting her day, one hand resting on a chunk of oak I'd split myself 3 weeks earlier. Then she gave me that smile. That HOA smile. The kind people get when they've had fake authority for too long and start thinking they're royalty. Community resources fall under Cedar Ridge oversight, Evan, she said, dead serious. If it's visible from common property, it can be redistributed for neighborhood use. I actually laughed out loud because the confidence on this woman was unbelievable. Redistributed, I said, walking closer through the snow. Denise, that wood came from trees on my land. I cut it, split it, stacked it, covered it before winter. You didn't redistribute anything. You stole it. But that's the thing about people like Denise. They never think they're stealing. In their heads, they're enforcing order, fixing society, protecting the neighborhood from people who don't fit the standard. And me? I definitely didn't fit the standard. I lived at the very edge of Cedar Ridge, technically outside the HOA boundary, older property, no membership agreement, no dues, no board oversight. That drove Denise insane. She hated that I could paint my shed without permission, park my truck wherever I wanted, cut my own trees, build my own fire pit. Meanwhile, everybody inside the HOA needed written approval just to change mailbox colors. And for years she'd been trying to drag me into their little suburban kingdom, one petty battle at a time. First it was letters taped to my gate saying my woodland aesthetic lowered property values. Then she called county zoning because she claimed my canoe trailer was visual clutter. Last winter, she even tried to confiscate my backup generator during a snowstorm because, according to her, emergency equipment should be shared equally during community outages. Shared equally. Yeah, by which she meant parked in her garage. Every time I pushed back, she'd tighten up that smile and talk to me like I was some reckless teenager who needed supervision. People like you always think rules don't apply to them. She told me once during a board meeting I wasn't even legally required to attend. And honestly, that sentence stuck with me because it revealed everything. Denise didn't care about rules. She cared about control. Rules were just the costume. So when I caught her dragging my firewood across the property line that morning, robe flapping in the wind like some dollar store dictator, I realized this wasn't about wood anymore. This was personal. You need to stop trespassing on my land, I told her, trying one last time to keep things civil. She rolled her eyes and shoved another log into the wheelbarrow. Everyone contributes to the community, Evan, whether they like it or not. I'm not in your community. You are geographically. God, that sentence. The arrogance of it almost impressed me. She genuinely believed proximity gave her ownership. Then she leaned closer and lowered her voice like she was explaining taxes to a child. The board's been patient with you because people feel sorry for you after the divorce, but eventually everybody has to cooperate. That hit a nerve harder than I expected. See, my divorce wasn't neighborhood gossip to me. It was 2 years of my life collapsing in slow motion. My ex left, sold her half, moved to Arizona with a guy who sold luxury pools, and the only thing I kept was that cabin at the edge of the woods. I rebuilt the place myself because, honestly, rebuilding the house felt easier than rebuilding my life. Denise knew that. Everybody did. Which is why the comment landed exactly how she intended it to. She wanted me embarrassed, small, isolated, and standing there in the snow watching her steal from me while throwing my divorce in my face. Something inside me shifted. Not rage exactly. Rage burns hot and stupid. This was colder than that. Cleaner. The kind of calm where your brain suddenly stops arguing and starts planning. I remember looking at the stacked firewood beside the shed and thinking, okay, if she wants to keep taking things that don't belong to her, maybe it's time she learns why boundaries exist in the first place. So I crossed my arms, stepped aside, and let her take the logs. Every single one she wanted. She smirked like she'd won something, like she'd finally put the stubborn outsider in his place, and before wheeling the load away, she tossed out one final line over her shoulder. Maybe now you'll start respecting the community. I watched her disappear through the trees, listened to the wheelbarrow rattling against frozen dirt. Then I looked down at the remaining pile and smiled to myself, because Denise had no idea, absolutely no idea, that she'd just made the biggest mistake of her entire HOA career. Now, before I tell you what happened next, you gotta understand something about HOA personalities, because if you've never dealt with one of these neighborhood power crusaders before, the whole story probably sounds insane. But trust me, people like Denise exist in almost every suburban pocket of America. According to standard procedure, a homeowners association only has authority over properties legally bound by its covenant agreements, meaning if your land isn't part of the HOA contract, they cannot fine you, seize your property, or enforce neighborhood policies against you just because they don't like your lifestyle. That's the part Denise either never understood or intentionally ignored. And honestly, I think it was the second one. From a legal perspective, trespassing laws are actually pretty straightforward in most states. If someone enters private land after being warned not to, especially repeatedly, they're exposing themselves to civil liability fast. But here's where things get weird psychologically. This is a psychological trap a lot of self-appointed authority figures fall into. The longer nobody challenges them, the more they confuse social pressure with actual legal power. Denise had spent years telling people what color fences they could paint, where trash bins could sit, how long guests could park in driveways. Eventually, she stopped seeing herself as a volunteer board member and started seeing herself as the neighborhood sheriff. And people around Cedar Ridge enabled it because, honestly, most folks would rather surrender a little freedom than deal with constant confrontation. That's how these situations snowball. One person avoids conflict, then another, until suddenly the loudest person in the neighborhood thinks they own the neighborhood. The lesson here is, boundaries only matter when somebody enforces them. And after years of watching Denise push people around without consequences, I finally decided maybe embarrassment was the only language she still understood. Little did I know, things were about to escalate way further than I originally planned. That night, the temperature dropped hard. One of those deep Appalachian cold fronts where the trees start cracking in the distance and every sound outside feels sharper than normal. I sat alone in my garage with an old propane heater buzzing beside me, staring at the pile of split oak stacked against the wall, replaying Denise's voice in my head over and over. People feel sorry for you after the divorce. Yeah, that one lingered. Not because it hurt exactly, but because it reminded me who she really was underneath all the HOA nonsense. Denise didn't just want compliance. She wanted emotional leverage. She wanted people feeling smaller around her. That's why she targeted widowers, retirees, single moms, anybody she thought wouldn't push back hard enough. And once I realized that, my irritation turned into something else entirely: focus. So around midnight, I grabbed a drill, hollowed out 3 old logs from the back of the stack, packed them with just enough black powder to create noise and pressure, then sealed them back carefully with wood glue and bark dust until they looked completely normal. Nothing dangerous, nothing meant to hurt anybody. Honestly, the loudest thing about the entire setup was probably my conscience asking whether this was a terrible idea. But by then I was committed. I carried the doctored logs outside, placed them right where Denise always stole from, brushed fresh snow around the pile, then went inside and mounted 2 extra trail cameras facing the property line. If she crossed over again, I wanted every second recorded crystal clear. Then I waited. And if you've ever waited for somebody to walk willingly into a trap they built for themselves, you know sleep doesn't happen much. Morning finally came, gray and bitter cold. I made coffee, sat on my porch in an old flannel jacket, and watched steam rise through the frozen air while the woods stayed quiet. 7:30, nothing. 8:15, still nothing. Then at exactly 8:26, there she was. Denise emerged from behind the cedar hedges wearing that same cream-colored robe, pushing the same squeaky wheelbarrow like she was beginning another shift at the Ministry of Neighborhood Justice. I almost admired the consistency. She didn't even hesitate either. Walked straight onto my property, grabbed the top logs from the stack, the exact logs I prepared, and started loading them into the wheelbarrow while muttering under her breath about resource fairness. I remember thinking, wow, this woman really cannot help herself. Then came the part that still makes me laugh when I picture it. As Denise rolled the wood back toward her yard, her husband Gary stepped outside, holding a coffee mug, looking exhausted already. Gary was one of those permanently defeated suburban husbands, the kind of guy who looked like he apologized to furniture after bumping into it. "You seriously took his wood again?" he asked quietly. Denise waved him off immediately. "Somebody around here has to enforce standards, Gary. I don't think you can enforce standards on property you don't own." That's because you don't understand governance. Governance. Jesus Christ. She said it like she was running the United Nations instead of harassing middle-aged homeowners over mulch colors. About 15 minutes later, smoke started rising from their backyard fire pit. I leaned forward slightly in my chair, coffee warming my hands, heartbeat suddenly louder than expected. 1 minute passed, then 2, then 3, and for one horrible second, I thought maybe the logs failed completely. Then boom. The sound cracked through the neighborhood like a shotgun blast. Birds exploded out of the trees. Gary screamed. Denise fell backward off her patio chair into the snow, and her mug launched clear across the yard before smashing against the fence. Honestly, the sheer chaos of it almost made me choke on my coffee. Neighbors started opening doors immediately, dogs barking everywhere, car alarms chirping in the distance. Denise scrambled backward through the snow covered in ash, eyes wide like she'd just survived a terrorist attack. "He tried to kill me," she screamed before I even stood up. Evan sabotaged HOA property. HOA property. Even after the explosion, she still called my Firewood HOA property. That part kills me. I walked slowly across the property line while everybody gathered outside watching the scene unfold. Denise pointed at me with shaking hands. Mascara streaked halfway down her face. "You planted explosives," she yelled. "You're insane." "Denise," I said calmly. "Those logs came from my woodpile. The same woodpile you were warned multiple times not to steal from." "It wasn't stealing." "Good," I replied. "Then you won't mind reviewing the trespassing footage." Her expression changed instantly. And I mean instantly. Because right there, in real time, she realized something narcissistic people almost never prepare for: evidence. Actual evidence. Facts they can't socially bulldoze through. "You recorded me without consent," she snapped. "On my property," I said, "where you repeatedly entered after being warned not to." Gary looked like he wanted to disappear underground. One of the neighbors, an older woman named Ruth, suddenly spoke up from the crowd. "Wait, she's been taking your wood this whole time." Denise whipped around immediately. "That's not the issue." "No," Ruth said slowly. "I think it kind of is." And just like that, the energy shifted. Because for years people tolerated Denise individually, quietly, privately, but now everybody was witnessing the behavior publicly all at once. That's the danger of narcissists losing control in front of an audience. Once the illusion cracks, people start comparing notes. Another neighbor stepped forward. "Didn't you threaten my son over basketball hoops last summer?" Then another voice from the crowd. "You reported my truck for being parked too close to the curb during chemo treatments." Gary closed his eyes like a man listening to the soundtrack of his marriage collapsing in surround sound. Denise tried regaining control fast. "This man created an explosive device," she shouted, pointing at me again. "Call the police." "Already did," I answered. That caught her completely off guard because yes, I had already called them. About 5 minutes before the explosion, actually. I reported suspicious trespassing concerns and informed dispatch there might be a noise complaint related to stolen firewood. See, the difference between panic and preparation is paperwork. According to standard procedure, if an incident's already documented before conflict escalates, credibility shifts immediately. Denise had spent years weaponizing complaints against other people, but now for the first time somebody had out-prepared her. Police arrived 20 minutes later. 2 deputies stepped into what looked like the world's pettiest war zone. Smoke drifting from the fire pit. Neighbors gathered in bathrobes. Denise covered in soot screaming about attempted murder while I stood there holding coffee like a guy waiting for a barbecue review. The deputies separated everybody and started asking questions. Denise talked first, obviously. She described me like some backwoods lunatic building homemade bombs to terrorize the neighborhood. One deputy actually looked concerned until I handed him printed copies of previous trespassing complaints, property maps showing I wasn't inside HOA jurisdiction, and timestamps from the trail cameras. Then we watched the footage together right there beside the patrol car. Crystal clear video. Denise entering my land. Denise loading wood after prior warnings. Denise removing marked logs from my pile. The deputy paused the footage halfway through and looked over at her. "Ma'am, were you aware this property wasn't under HOA authority?" Denise folded her arms immediately. "That's irrelevant." Bad answer. Very bad answer. Because from a legal perspective, once she acknowledged knowingly entering private land under false authority, The conversation changed completely. Suddenly, this wasn't a neighbor misunderstanding anymore. It was repeated trespassing and theft. Small theft, sure, but documented theft. The deputies sighed the way exhausted public servants do when they realize adults have forced them into kindergarten drama before lunchtime. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "you cannot remove property from land you do not own, regardless of HOA disputes." Denise stared at him like her brain physically rejected the sentence. "So you're taking his side?" "I'm taking the side of property law." That line hit harder than the explosion. You could actually see the humiliation settling into her face because authority figures like Denise survive on social dominance. The second official authority contradicted her publicly, the entire fantasy started collapsing. And then came the real twist. Gary spoke up. Quietly at first. "I told you to leave him alone." Denise turned sharply. "Excuse me. I told you months ago this was getting out of hand." Nobody moved. Nobody even breathed. Gary looked terrified saying it. But once he started, years of frustration just poured out. "You keep picking fights with people because you like controlling them," he said, voice shaking. "And now look at this. Police at our house, neighbors staring at us, explosions in the backyard over stolen firewood." Denise looked genuinely stunned. Not angry, stunned. Like she never imagined Gary possessed independent thoughts. Then Ruth muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "About time somebody said it." That was the killing blow right there. Not the explosion. Not the cops. Public embarrassment. Community perception. Denise spent years controlling the neighborhood through intimidation and social pressure, and now the exact same mechanism had turned against her. Within a week, she resigned from the HOA board for personal reasons. Within 2 weeks, half the neighborhood started openly complaining about prior harassment incidents. And about a month later, Gary moved into a condo 30 minutes away and filed for divorce. Turns out the firewood explosion wasn't the loudest thing that winter after all. Funny enough, I never even pressed charges. I could have. Deputies offered me the option. But honestly, watching Denise lose the one thing she truly cared about, control, felt more satisfying than court ever would have. These days the neighborhood's quieter. People wave more. Nobody measures grass height with rulers anymore. And every once in a while when I'm stacking fresh firewood near the property line, somebody driving past will slow down, grin at me, and ask the same question. "Hey Evan, got any explosive oak left?" And every single time, I just smile and say, "Nah." Turns out boundaries work better than gunpowder. Looking back now, the weirdest part of the whole situation isn't even the explosion. It's how long everybody tolerated Denise before things finally blew up. Literally and socially. Because the truth is, most neighborhood tyrants don't start out powerful, they start out annoying. Then people avoid confrontation, stay polite, keep the peace, laugh things off at barbecues, and over time that tiny little unchecked behavior grows into full-blown control. That's how somebody ends up believing they can walk onto another person's land and take whatever they want while calling it community governance. And honestly, if I'm being fair, part of the blame sits with people like me too. I spent years trying to out-reason somebody who didn't care about reason. I kept thinking if I explained the property line one more time, showed one more document, attended one more meeting, somehow she'd suddenly become reasonable. But people driven by control don't interpret kindness as maturity. They interpret it as permission. The lesson here is, boundaries are only real when consequences exist behind them. That doesn't mean escalating recklessly or turning every disagreement into war, because trust me, I'm fully aware this whole story danced dangerously close to becoming a disaster. One wrong variable, and things could have gone very differently. From a legal perspective, I got lucky the situation stayed contained because homemade pranks involving explosives can absolutely backfire in court regardless of intention. And that's important to say out loud because too many people online hear revenge stories and only focus on the satisfaction part, not the risk underneath it. According to standard procedure, documenting harassment, recording trespassing where legally permitted, filing reports early, and creating paper trails will protect you way better than trying to become some suburban vigilante. But psychologically speaking, I do think something valuable happened in Cedar Ridge after all this. People finally stopped confusing keeping the peace with surrendering self-respect. They started speaking honestly, comparing experiences, calling out manipulation when they saw it. And once that happened, Denise lost the one weapon she depended on most: silence. This is a psychological trap communities fall into all the time. One loud person dominates the social atmosphere, while everybody else privately assumes they're alone in feeling uncomfortable. Then the second someone pushes back publicly, the illusion collapses almost overnight. Suddenly, everybody realizes, wait, we all hated this behavior the whole time. And maybe that's the real reason this story spread around town so fast. It wasn't about exploding firewood. It was about watching somebody finally challenge a person who thought accountability only applied to everyone else. These days I still live out there by the woods, same old cabin, same uneven driveway, same stacked oak near the fence line. Except now nobody touches it. Funny how that works. And honestly, the whole thing taught me something I probably should have learned after the divorce. Peace and passivity are not the same thing. Sometimes protecting your peace means being willing to make people uncomfortable when they cross lines they were warned not to cross. Anyway, that's my side of the story. But I want to know what you think. Did Denise get exactly what she deserved? Or did I take things way too far? And more importantly, have you ever dealt with an HOA nightmare neighbor like this before? Drop your story in the comments because trust me, after this mess, I know for a fact Cedar Ridge isn't the only neighborhood hiding a self-appointed dictator behind decorative mailbox rules.